Good evening. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Ishan. Tonight, we're of course focusing on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's big visit to the United States, the second within a year, and a lot of things to discuss. Tonight, we'll be focusing on what the CEOs had to say. Prime Minister Modi met the CEOs of companies whose total net worth is total to be about $4.5 trillion. What did they promise? Well, they wanted more reforms to happen. What exactly are those reforms, and what can India expect in terms of investment from these big businesses in the United States, and what do these US companies want in terms of more reforms? We'll be discussing all that and more with Mohan Guruswamy, senior economist. He's over here with us. Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, member at NIPFP, is here with us. Also joining us live from the national capital is Himangshu, senior editor of the Economic Times. Mr. Guruswamy, I'll start with you. Let's just first talk about the entire idea of how this is happening, the entire effectiveness of this campaign of hard selling India, of trying to ensure that India gets maximum share of the pie that is on offer in the United States with these big companies.
Well, you know, United States is a major source of capital for the world. And so he's gone to the right place to seek money. And but most of the investment which will come from America will come from the smaller companies. The large companies are already here. For instance, GE is here. GE can expand. But, you know, one of the things he would be looking for is, you know, large investments from companies like Boeing, where we are going to buy 2,700 aircraft in the next 35 years. So, you know, the idea is that make in India, for India. So, you know, the Chinese have just tied up with Boeing to make 300 planes. So, India will also be looking for similar deals. And so, he's making the right noises and saying that, you know, you can set up factories in India easily. We'll facilitate things for you. There is no power shortage now. And, you know, we'll smoothen up various things. So, the companies there have asked for some more reforms. They want, you know, labor laws, they want flexible labor laws, and they want... So I think he's trying to humor them and woo them. This is a game where you have to sell India as a place to come.
And it's quite a departure how perhaps India was being projected. I mean, the Prime Minister himself taking such an active role is...
Yeah, he realizes the importance of this because we're adding 12 million people to the workforce every year.
Right.
And that is, you know, 10 lakhs a month. And that's not... you know, it's not easy to create employment for all those 10 lakhs. Because most of the people coming into the market now are people who are educated with some skills. It's not that as if they're only good for construction labor. So, you know, you have to create jobs for them.
All right, job creation is an essential that Prime Minister Modi, of course, is focusing on, along with skills development as well. But Professor Bhanumurthy, while Prime Minister Narendra Modi is there, the Chinese president is also there. Xi Jinping is over there, and he met, while Prime Minister Modi met about 40 CEOs, he met 650 business leaders. So India and China both vying for that same pool, because China is also slowing down, and as has been reported often, and that comparison always happens between India and China. So how do you see this shaping up, and what's at stake in terms of in the investments?
Well, I mean, it's very clear. I mean, we have been talking about China, India seems to be a competing destinations. Compared to the last visit, this visit, Prime Minister Modi has to face the Chinese president also. So actually he started, I mean, it's a very interesting thing, you know, Chinese president started from the East Coast and Indian Prime Minister starting from the West Coast. I think there is some kind of a competition for the resources, as Dr. Guruswamy said. The resources has to come from US. So both China and India seems to be competing for that limited resources. And mind you, actually, this is not a one-off event. And we have to see this in a perspective. Just before a week, the finance minister also went on to, I mean, Singapore and other countries to attract more foreign investments. Right now, I think this is a very great opportunity for India to sell in the international, among the international investors, and try to attract as much foreign investments as possible to revive the manufacturing sector. The Make in India campaign, unfortunately, although it's already completed 1 year, on the ground level, it has not really taken up much.
Yeah, and that's a concern that is there. I mean, and I think that is a subtext of what the CEOs also had to say.
Yes,
But Himangshu, I want to come across to you on this one because we'll talk about what we're calling the show about the reforms process, about what more do these American companies want in terms of reforms. And but there is a slight bit of disconnect as to what is being sold and the ground reality in India. Would you agree with that?
Well, whenever any country is doing a bit of a hard sell, one would find some kind of a disconnect. There might be a little bit of exaggeration here and there. But on the whole, I think India is on a pretty strong wicket just now. The reason is there's a growing mistrust with China. There have been allegations that Chinese companies, allegedly with state backing, have been doing corporate espionage, cyber warfare. And companies are very worried about it.
Right.
Second, companies like Google, Facebook, the social media companies, you have Twitter, they are not allowed in China. So for them, India is a huge market where China is not competing because China does not allow them. They have their own concerns like labor laws and all is something everybody talks about. But Japan had a lot of investment without this kind of hire fire system. But for these internet and social media kind of companies, they have some basic issues like the speed of internet connection, the reliability of electricity, the quality of engineering graduates. We can boast of a lot of numbers, but the actual employable ones, these companies find are scarce in India. So it's an ongoing process where I think India is in a pretty strong position. But at the same time, India needs this investment a lot. We are, heading for an era where U.S. interest rates will rise, which would lead to a lot of capital flowing away from emerging markets into the developed countries, particularly the USA. And, that can have implications on our balance of payment, the exchange rate. So it will be very good if India can attract some FDI, some direct investment, which is the best quality of forex reserves you can get, unlike hot money flows into the capital markets and all.
All right. Mohan Guruswamy, talking about the reforms process, because as far as India is concerned, while the campaign is Make in India or Make India Digital and so on and so forth, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of actual reforms, has enough happened? Has the pace been good enough? We've seen a recent example of the land bill and how that became such an issue that there was no consensus about, and ultimately there was a stalemate that lasted forever.
Well, you can't say that, things could be better, but things have also changed. Infrastructure is far more better placed now than it was, say, 10 years ago.
Right.
And the roads are getting better, the ports are getting expanded, the rail loads are increasing. Land, is not such a big problem because the state subject,
right,
and the states are competing with each other, and the states will constantly, acquire land and then resell it for industry. So that is not an issue. I don't see anybody really complaining on an individual level that, it's difficult to get land. Land is easy to get. And farmers and whoever is quite willing to sell land for a good price.
Right.
I think the after effect of the land bill is a little bit exaggerated. I would really worry about GST not coming in.
Right.
Because GST would have then unified the markets and, had a lot of other positive effects. I still hope that good sense will prevail and the Congress party and the BJP both will use their good sense to get that through. But having said that, things are also changing and things have changed. It's not regime specific. Things that keep changing with India with time. It always seems that, some areas did better. So I really don't want to worry too much about that.
All right. Himangshu, what's coming to you quickly, because something that was always said as far as money coming into India, especially through the FDI route, there were also a lot of reservations that have often been expressed, especially politically, and those leading to complications that otherwise would not be in attracting business. So do you think that mindset in India has changed? Are we ready to really welcome more FDI in critical sectors? And is the government willing to bite the bullet on that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clearly a strong mindset to get FDI into India. There would be a few stray cases here and there of opposition, some protest, but by and large, and this is one important thing coming back to the India versus China debate. In India, whenever some company has come in, gradually they've been able to establish themselves here. What they say is we look at India as a long-term business. So, whether it is GE, even in his recent visit, Jeff Immelt, the CEO, he was again saying we are looking at it in the long term. Companies like BP, which came in, they also say we are looking at it in the long term.
Right.
The good thing about India, as far as these companies are concerned, that there might be debate, there might be parliament blockade, there might be media criticism, but once the matter is settled and once the country moves on, it keeps moving in the same direction. Unlike China, which attracted a lot of equity investment, a lot of money into the market, and suddenly there's a clampdown. They have a rule that if you hold 5%, you can't sell.
Right.
The local brokerages, they are asked to do things to support the market so that it doesn't fall. Some Chinese journalist who wrote something which seemed negative for the stock market, he was made to apologize on TV to say, sorry, this was wrong.
Right.
India that way is very different, and from that wider perspective, we are much more welcoming of foreign investment. Our country does have its issues. There is the opposition, there is a strong media, everything is there. But I think once these issues are resolved, things do move in the right direction. Jeff Immelt, for example, the GE chairman, in his press conference, he made a very interesting observation that we made money even in the Dabhol contract, which was very controversial. Enron had all kinds of trouble. But GE, which was the contractor in the plant, they did make their money there, and they are always positive about it. So, on the whole, yes, India is pretty well set to get foreign investment.
Yes, Mohan, you want to come in?
One thing we must realize that, FDI, foreign investment, is mostly Indian money. Because, 68% of our FDI, for instance, comes from Mauritius and Singapore. So it's mostly, good part of that is round-tripping money. So, India must look good to Indians first. And this, I think, is beginning to happen now. There was this period till 2009 when FDI reached 68 billion.
Right.
And China was 100 billion, we were 68 billion. So we began to compete. But then it dropped. That means that internally there was loss of confidence. Some of that confidence coming back. There's a little buoyancy in the internal investment mood. You see, people are willing to, to invest in new businesses. They see opportunities. They see expansion of the market. So I think some of that money will start rolling back. I think the Prime Minister should also focus on that. Yeah.
Can I just add some here? I think it's not just the political parties who are wary of foreign direct investment. We also need to understand the fear of foreign competition among domestic private industries. I think we need to see that even the domestic private companies also collaborate with. That's why we got into the joint venture kind of system. So I think we need to create some kind of atmosphere where the domestic private companies also deal with the international companies who are coming through FDI route.
All right. I want to move on to, as far as the reform process is concerned, Himangshu, Mohan Guruswamy mentioned, of course, GST is one of those critical factors. Also, there have been, as far as tax is concerned, a lot of rationalization explanations even coming from the finance minister's office. But is that good enough? And what are the key areas that perhaps India should be now focusing on, other than these points that I mentioned, which could ensure that investment not just trickles in, but really gushes in?
See, one of the points I can reiterate what another panelist has already said. GST is absolutely critical. There is no doubt about it. The other thing, which miss the news headlines are, there are a whole lot of these small initiatives that are happening. Like diesel has been decontrolled. LPG subsidy, it is going heavily through the bank account. There's a lot of tightening of nuts and bolts. Public sector appointments are much more comprehensive and better. Banks are under a lot of discipline. So, all these little measures, and there's a long list of things, which each one of them individually cannot be, the talking point to an audience of CEOs in the United States, perhaps. But all these things together, you give them a few more months, maybe a year. There is a lot of optimism among many people that, the whole thing will get together and give a different flavor to the investment climate in India and the whole economy in general in terms of increasing efficiency, reducing corruption. So I'm pretty optimistic about, the sum total of these small measures, the system tightening in various ministries, various departments, PSUs, these are the kind of reforms which I think are very important.
Yes, and
if you
reforms
talk
of
of
the
big bang, there's not
bureaucracy,
much left. There is
red
maybe
tape.
labor reform one can do.
All right, red tape is something that
That is
something
that is also happening.
all right. I want to get in Professor Bhanumurthy on that, Himangshu, if you just allow me over there. As far as the bureaucracy is concerned, I mean, it's one thing to say we'll cut down red tape, but has enough change happened in the system itself too, or has it become just too centralized, and therefore we could be looking at things that perhaps later go into litigation?
No, I think before the Prime Minister went to US, we had seen one of the important news item, that is India is still ranked at 142 in terms of doing business.
Ease of doing business.
I think that is the things that have been discussed yesterday when the Prime Minister met CEOs. Three things they have asked for. One is governance. The second is taxation issue, as other panelists have pointed out. The third is infrastructure. I think these are the three things which is a core of doing business in the country. The point that you raised about red tapeism is part of the governance issue. And of course, there are a lot of initiatives that the government has taken in terms of improving the doing business. But I think the results will take some more time to show up in these kind of segments. But if you look at the taxation part, I think that's exactly where it's very important for the opposition parties and everybody to sit together and see that we'll pass this.
All right.
And the infrastructure, Prime Minister seems to be depending more on the foreign direct investments. But unfortunately, I really don't know what's going on here. One of the biggest infrastructure sector which we succeeded is on the telecommunication.
Right.
For the past 2-3 months, the kind of services we get in the telecommunication shows that there are some more issues even in that particular sector.
All right, Mohan Guruswamy wanted to come in. I just want to add, I mean, Professor Bhanumurthy didn't elaborate on that point, but as far as domestic consensus building is concerned, that is perhaps something that the Prime Minister, given the fact that the NDA government has a brute majority in the lower house, so in terms of consensus building, has not enough happened. So we don't have a larger picture or a larger consensus as far as the entire reforms process itself goes.
That's true, and that is a major failure of the government, that the politics continue to be very adversarial. They're not on talking terms, the opposition and the ruling parties. So, they have to start doing business with each other. After all, it is not their fiefdoms, it's the whole country which is involved.
Right.
And so they have to rise above petty politics. And I think the government has to take the initiative here. And the ball lies squarely in the court of the Prime Minister. And I hope that, after he comes back from the trip from America, he'll pick it up and then, lead to places where there can be consensus on larger issues. Having said that, one important area you need consensus is, Indian economy is driven by public investment, by government investment. Government investment is following. That is the reason why we're slowing down. Capital expenditure is about 9% of the budget now. We need to push that up. We need to get on to 20%, 25% to get real growth. If you get 25%, you're going to drive the economy at 12% a year.
Right.
And you're spending a lot of money on giveaways, on populist things. So you need to cut that down. For that, you need a consensus. So you got to sit down with the opposite side and work out things, saying that this is what we should do for the country and this is what we should leave for politics. So I think that maturity is yet to be seen. China doesn't have this problem because there's no opposition party. The party decides everything. But in India, we are stuck with this adversarial politics. And that has to end. I think it's causing us far too much damage and too many losses. And I think, the Prime Minister should come back to India and focus on this.
All right, Himangshu, but I'll ask you to also comment on the same because Mohan Guruswamy very importantly pointed out as far as the public sector spending is concerned, that hasn't seen a significant rise, and the government also then needs to do its bit. Apart from that consensus building, that is proved to be rather of a dampener as far as the reforms process and consensus building around that goes. We'll just come to you.
See, the government has to strike a balance between how much state spending can be done and its fiscal boundaries. So, if you remember the last year's budget, the government did, slightly relax the fiscal target for this year, the fiscal deficit target. I don't remember the exact numbers, but a few decimal points, it was relaxed so that you can spend a little more on the state initiatives and infrastructure.
We seem to have lost that link with Himangshu what's over there. We'll try to re-establish that. But Professor Bhanumurthy, you want to comment?
Yeah, basically on the public investment, it's a very important issue actually. But I think the fiscal deficit targets have been set by the Finance Commission, and also we have a FRBM Act. I mean, the revised FRBM Act has been there. Just that there is a little, kind of, in the fiscal deficit target, they have actually came out with a slightly higher one, maybe 0.2% or so. But just if you look at the first quarter numbers of the public finances, there seems to be actually increase in the public investment, particularly the capital expenditure in the current year. Although it may not really show up much in terms of the value addition, which will take some more time. But if this kind of trend continues for the current year as well as the next year, you would see a much better recovery in the overall manufacturing sector.
All right, it's time to get in closing comments. Himangshu, we'll start with you since you're back. As far as the opportunity goes, well, it certainly exists over here. Of course, Xi Jinping is also competing for the same investment, but it seems everything is on track. Perhaps the only thing missing is consensus building back home. What would your final comments be?
Well, I think we've got to be a little realistic and, something which is to the credit of this Prime Minister, but that's also a bit of a shortcoming, that he has raised such expectations that, even the most educated academic people, many of us thought that, in 6 months, 1 year, India would be different. But actually, given the state of the economy, the global economy, and a lot of mess to be sorted out, I think we need to be a little more patient. Things are happening in bits. There's been the coal mining auction. There's been an auction for LNG. There's been all kinds of belt tightening. There might be the generation of black money might come down a bit. I'm not even talking of black money coming back, but even if the generation of the parallel cash economy comes down by 10%, that itself will a lot of good effects. The indirect tax revenue has been buoyant, which may be due to lesser black money generation, better compliance or whatever. So I think we got to be patient. It's still been, a year and a quarter. So, and if you have to do a few good things, the medicine can be slightly bitter at times, which may last a year. That's how India's liberalization in the early 90s began. We had a couple of years of 18% inflation before things settled down. So I would advise some patience.
All right.
Not saying things are perfect. They could have been better, but certainly I think in some time.
Professor Bhanumurthy, would you agree with that? That a little bit more of a patient approach is required, but then the government itself is hard selling the bill.
Well, I think it's also need to be looked at a completely world perspective. Right now, there is no export market happening. The world is not in a great shape as we thought. In fact, there are expectations that it may worsen further. So, given that kind of situation, my view is that the government has already made a lot of right noises. I think we need to really have some patience in seeing some of the positives. Having said that, government also need to be careful in terms of not creating some kind of confusion. There are many issues which they were not really clear. For example, Indian Financial Code, then that encryption law. I think again the recent the policy on policy on the internet usage.
Right.
These are some of the things which has created some kind of confusion.
All right. So the government needs to be careful with that. Mohan Guruswamy, final word. Perhaps if you could list out three priority areas that reforms process
my
focus on.
One priority is get capital expenditure up, move it up. That means slash a lot of the giveaways. And if oil prices are coming down, don't pass on the benefit to the consumers. invest it.
Yeah.
Second thing is to reform public sector undertakings. If you take the administered prices business out, it's a huge loss. And the total assets of public sector exceed that of the private sector still.
Right.
So you got to get returns on that on those assets. Otherwise, you're putting in money. For instance, you can't keep spending money on Air India. At some stage, you got to take a call. Air India has 43,000 crores in the hole already. Another 8,000 crores waiting to happen this year. So you can't keep bailing out Air India, saying that, there are companies who don't produce anything. Scooters India hasn't produced a scooter for decades.
Right.
Heavy engineering has not produced a machine for decades. You can't keep these companies going. You got to do something. You got Hindustan Photo Films in Ooty, which doesn't produce any. Nobody uses photo films in this country anyway.
All right.
So you got to take calls on all these companies and do something with it.
Just a small point. I think the whole investors also looking forward for completion of Bihar election.
All right.
I think that's going to be
That
a very
perhaps,
interesting.
and that is where the political tone really could set the cat among the pigeons, because that could really change dynamics in terms of priorities. Mohan, Guruswamy, Professor Bhanumurthy and Himangshu, thank you very much for coming in and helping us understand a little better as far as the Modi reforms go. What do the US companies expect from us? Well, hopefully that clarified things for you. We'll, of course, keep you updated and talk about in detail on our other shows about the Prime Minister's big visit to the United States. So keep watching Rajya Sabha TV.